Are you ready to go time travelling again? Because today we're journeying back into Tudor London for the third part in this series, which I am loving making. And today we've got a world of treats and treasures to dive into, starting here at Cheapside. And of course we have our wonderful map of Tudor London. That bit's upside down, showing London in 1520. And we've used this on two walks so far. The previous walk we started here at Greyfriars. I can't unfold it completely. It's a massive map. It's a great map. And we walked down, basically down towards the Thames and ended at Blackfriars. The first walk we did was was over here near the Tower of London. And then we walked around and we ended at Austin Friars, which became the home of Thomas Cromwell. And I'm not sure if I included in the story there, one of the big figures in today's story had a little bit of a beef with old Cromwell. But today we're here, right, luckily in this half of the map. You can see here Cheapside, the beginning of Cheapside. And where I'm stood now, that would have been a conduit here somewhere, a water source for the city. And of course, water was incredibly important. Well, it's still incredibly important, but it was an issue in Tudor London. They were quite concerned about getting enough water. But we'll talk about all these things on the way. So we're going to try and cover some of this central portion here, some of this sort of central portion here, and look at some important places which came into being during Tudor London. Look at the Walbrook there. The Walbrook comes into the story as well today. And for additional context, our start point here is just over the road from St Paul's Cathedral. There's St Paul's there, and here is Cheapside. And for those of you new to the channel, I've made a series, I think up to 7 episodes on the churches of the City of London. This church here is a particular beauty with a very fascinating courtyard. When you read about Tudor London, you're often going to come across quotes and descriptions provided by the great antiquarian John Stow, who was born just up here on Cornhill in 1524, 1525, it's unclear. But his lifespan kind of follows, I guess, the life of this map. This map shows London, Tudor London in 1520. The Tudor period starts with Henry VII. I'm going to pick a date off the top of my head. I do have notes in my pocket. I think it's 1485. So this is what, 45 years into the Tudor period. It's about 11 or 12 years into the reign of Henry VIII. And the Tudor period ends with the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603. So it incorporates the Elizabethan period. And Stow died in 1605, but his life runs basically from the time of this map until the end of the Tudor period. And Cheapside was one of the great markets of London. And he describes the scene as the market traders would set up here early in the morning at dawn, 6 AM in the summer and slightly later in the winter at first light. And he describes the cacophony of noise. And London, medieval London and Tudor London had a series of great markets. You can see how, look how wide the street is. And that was why it was so wide, because this is where the market would be laid out. In Stow's Survey of London, which was published in 1598, it's an essential source for learning about Tudor London. He also recalls his own childhood, starting in the 1520s, and he writes about the blare of the noise of country folk with their wares, which is interesting, and of course all the different accents that would have mingled around here. He talks about the other markets that traded on 6 days a week. There were markets at Leadenhall, at Eastcheap, Fish Street Hill, Cornhill, Newgate Street, and there are a number of quays as well, which we'll talk about later, and that's where we will go. We will end up there on the course of this walk. One of the things you kind of got to give up with your London studies is the terror that you've missed something out. You've always missed something out. You've always missed a big thing. Go into the comments. Even if you're only this far into the video, go in the comments. There will be people in there go, oh, you walked past this thing. I've made so many videos in the City of London. I've covered them in previous videos, but it's there in the back of my head, like Milk Street, is it Milk Street? There is a significant place somewhere along Cheapside that I know I've included in the previous video and I can't remember what it is, or who it is, or where it is. I think there's a monument just up here. St Mary Le Bow Church, just over there on Cheapside today. But in 1520 it's on the map, but it sits slightly back off the street. I think we can see the original part of the church down there, or, well, I mean a rebuilt part of the church in the original site. And where Trail Finders is over there, or in front of the church, there was a pub, the King's Head pub. And Milk Street, which I just walked past back there when I was fretting about missing something, that is on the that's on the 1520 map, as are a number of the other streets that run off Cheapside here. Bread Street, for example. They're pretty descriptive of what was going on in those streets at the time. Somewhere along this side of Cheapside here was an establishment called the Cow Face. I'll look up what that was. I think it's an inn or a hotel, a hostel of some description, not a pub. And this is a significant and impressive view as you look up King Street there towards the Guildhall. Now the Guildhall slightly predates the Tudor period. It was completed, I think, in 1430, started around, I think, 1411. So it will be part of our Medieval London series. I have included the Guildhall in previous videos as well, so I'll link to that below. It's a site that predates, goes all the way back to the Roman period as well. There's some really impressive Roman ruins there, but where it links to our story today is that is where John Stow did his antiquarian research amongst the parchments and the documents of the Guildhall Library. I knew I'd find it. Here it is on the corner of Ironmonger Lane, and I'm pretty sure that's the monument commemorating the birthplace of Thomas Becket, St Thomas of Canterbury. Thomas of Becket lived here, or was born here and lived here. You know, one of the most significant figures in medieval London. I guess that will have to kind of come into the video about medieval London. What's interesting here on the plaque is that it mentions that Becket was the son of Gilbert Becket, a mercer, and the mercers play a very important part of the story today. Very soon we'll encounter one of London's most notable, if not the most notable, mercer of London. And where the shops are on the right here, this was the site of the Hospital of St Thomas of Acre. And of course the map I'm using, the 1520 map, predates the dissolution of the monasteries, which would happen in the 1530s and radically alter the shape of Elizabethan London. Multiple writers talk about the Elizabethan London being one of a city of ruins, which were caused largely by the dissolution of the monasteries and the vast amount of land that they held in London, and the way that that completely changed the shape. And these buildings sometimes were just pulled down, completely pulled down, and sometimes some of the masonry was just stolen, but some was left standing. So these remnants of the old monastic London and the religious London were scattered all around the place, and those buildings were repurposed for other uses. It's quite difficult to get a train of thought with a bus engine and a siren, but that's part of the noise and cacophony that Stow talks about along Cheapside. It's interesting to think of the London in this map of not as a dense city of narrow lanes, some of which, many of which still survive, but actually a city in 1520 of lots of open spaces. That you had the kind of priories and the nunneries and the monasteries that we've talked about in the previous two videos, and the grand houses like that of Thomas Cromwell, where you had kind of large gardens, and the houses were spread around these courtyards, and they had cloisters and porticos, and there's a lot of open space in the 1520s city. What Stow notes, the city that would change, is when the dissolution of the monasteries happened and that land was repurposed. The city changed radically. The gardens were built over, and the new people that took over those buildings, the wealthy people, whether they were courtiers of Henry VIII, favourites who were given this land or bought it on the cheap, or the new merchants that flooded into the city, they built the city in a very different way. And that's what Stow writes about, and he wasn't none too impressed. And here we have Grocers' Hall Court, and the halls of the livery companies really do expand during the Tudor period, and they also took advantage of the dissolution of the monasteries to some extent. So here we have one of the great landmarks of London, the Mansion House, the seat of the Lord Mayor of London. And I was very fortunate to go in there last June when I was invited to follow along the Knollys Rose ceremony, and it's an incredibly impressive place. Not, however, on the map of Tudor London, so I guess the Lord Mayor there would have just been residing at the Guildhall, I suppose. And the river Walbrook runs beside the Mansion House down there, down Walbrook Street. I've made at least 2 videos about the Walbrook, but it will come into the story a little bit later along. And on the side of the Mansion House we have the plaque which marks what was here in 1520. It was St Mary Woolchurch Hall, which is an interesting name. Where I'm perched on a stone slab here in front of the Mansion House, you can see actually there was what they call a stocks market here, right in front of the church. Of course, the Bank of England wouldn't have been here yet. The Bank of England is just over there. Hi there. Thanks to the gentleman who just came and tapped me on the shoulder to say hello. The Bank of England is just over there, not there in 1520, but the building just there, the very impressive colonnaded building, marks the site of one of the real landmarks, if you like, of Tudor London, but also an important statement in London's place in the world. A bit like all the building work that's going on. And here's a plaque on the front of the Mansion House mentioning the stocks market that's shown on the Tudor London map. Against this vision, if you like, or this image of the decays of the old monastic London, we have to also take into account the growth of prosperity of the City of London in this period of time, in the period of time of John Stow's lifetime. And you have what Stow describes, the new merchants coming in to take the place of the monastic buildings. A lot of the monastic buildings as well, the churches, the monasteries, the priories, the convents, the nunneries, they also supported hospitals and schools. So there was a period of time where those hospitals and schools were shut down. During the brief reign of Queen Mary, Bloody Mary, many of those were reopened, and they remained open under the rule of Queen Elizabeth I. But Stow talks about the kind of, I suppose you might say that today we think of it as being slightly gauche and nouveau riche, if you like. And he talked about how the wealthy building mansions, they built over the large gardens with bowling alleys and dice houses. They no longer built almshouses, but they built mansions like midsummer pageants with towers, turrets and chimney tops. And Stow also noted how the style of house that the new wealthy merchants built had changed. Property prices in London boomed after the dissolution of the monasteries, which is an interesting twist. I've talked about that before. In Stow's lifetime, the population of London quadrupled from 50,000 when he was born in the 1520s to 200,000 by the time he died. So property was too valuable to be turned over to gardens and cloisters like they had done during the period of the great monastic houses of the friaries, the priories and so forth. So the new merchants, they tended to build up, sometimes 4 or 5 stories high. The ground floor would often be where business was done, and then they built the rest of the house on the upper floors. And of course this is where we get that kind of type of Tudor house where you have the upper floors overhanging the lower floors. And so the streets became more enclosed. It's an interesting idea, and some of these houses were still in existence at the time when Walter Besant was writing in the 1890s, and it's his description of that I've drawn from, although I think he's drawing from Stow. And they would hang a sign out the front indicating what their business was. And there were still a couple of examples of these existing around the city in the 1890s. One of the big changes in the City of London, I've noticed in the last 10 years, is the amount of people now in the city at the weekend. It used to be a ghost town at the weekends, even as, like I say, even as recently as 10, 15 years ago. First time I walked the Walbrook, I think, was about 2010. On a Saturday, I think, or a Sunday, nobody here. Now it's rammed at the weekend. Absolutely rammed, full of people. This impressive building here, which overshadows the Bank of England, is the Royal Exchange. Today it's a luxury sort of shopping arcade, but it actually marks, in a lot of ways, a real symbol of both the ambitions of Tudor London and, you might say, the triumph of Tudor London and the establishment of London's place at the centre of certainly European trade and what would become global trade. This impressive building here, I believe, is the third building on the Royal Exchange site, the third iteration of the Royal Exchange. The original building, as it tells us here, opened in 1571, but that was destroyed by the Great Fire of London in 1666, along with 1/3 of London. That second Royal Exchange, which opened shortly after the Great Fire, was also destroyed by fire in the 1830s, 1838. And then this building was built in 1844. The street here, Royal Exchange Street, I've always found it one of the most, if you like, continental of London streets. And there might be a reason for that when you look at the origins of the Royal Exchange, or I could just be imprinting that on it now. The Royal Exchange was the brainchild of a merchant, a mercer by the name of Sir Thomas Gresham, who was from a family of very wealthy, originally Norfolk merchants and businessmen. And it was Gresham's father who moved to London and set him up in business. I think it was either his father or his uncle, Sir Richard Gresham, was a Lord Mayor of London, and sent Sir Thomas, or Thomas at that point, to Antwerp, which at that point was the commercial heart of Europe. The mercers, of course, were traders in textiles and cloths and textiles, and I think they're still one of the wealthiest of the livery companies. Gresham was there on the business of the king. He was an agent of the king as well as there on business. He was very impressed by Antwerp and impressed by the power of it, and he wanted to bring some of that to London. So he had the idea of building a great bourse, an exchange, a bourse like they had in Antwerp. So the Corporation of London gave him the land here, and there were like 4 streets and I think around 80 houses on this site here, which was cleared for him in 1567, and it took just 6 months for the roof to be put on the original Royal Exchange, which was opened by Queen Elizabeth I, who dined first at Gresham's house, and they came here and opened the Grand Bourse for London. Not long after, and sadly after Gresham's death, Antwerp declined as a commercial centre, and so London was primed to take its place as one of the trading centres of Europe, and at the beginning of what would become, the very beginnings of what would become a global empire. Partly the brainchild of Sir Thomas Gresham. So in that sense, you can see the way that the foundation for London's future influence in the world was laid during the Tudor period, with the establishment of things like the Royal Exchange here, and also the modernisation of the state that happened under Henry VIII and under Elizabeth I. Now I'm going to show you something a little bit more a little bit more functional and lower the tone slightly, just down here at the end of the Walbrook. So Cornhill here, one of the hills of the City of London, of course, and the birthplace of John Stow, where he lived in his early life. And he recalled that as a child he would walk from here to get milk from the nuns at the Minories, where they would have grazing land there in the Minories. We walked up the Minories in our first Tudor London video, and it's also in another video where I walk along London's first lost river, the original lost river, And it shows us that kind of contrast that happened in Stow's lifetime, where you had grazing land right there next to the walls of the City of London, next to the Roman walls of the City of London. It's quite an image, isn't it? Quite a contrast. This is obviously not Tudor London, but I don't know if I've noticed this before. So someone tells me that it's in another video, but this is a well that was discovered and much enlarged, and this pump was erected in the year of 1799 by the contributions of the Bank of England, the East India Company, and neighbouring fire offices, together with the bankers and traders of the ward of Cornhill, which is fascinating. I do want to make a video with somebody about the East India Company and their influence on the shape of London. This is Pope's Head Alley, which is a completely kind of modern building, but there was a pub here, or an inn here, named the Pope's Head, which you can see on the 1520 map. So we're coming back past the Mansion House here, which is just opposite the Royal Exchange, and we're walking down Walbrook, the street Walbrook, which takes its name from the river that is running right beneath my feet here. St Stephen Walbrook is undergoing renovation work. That is in my City of London Churches series, and I actually went inside that. I think it was during open house one year. And over here on the right in Walbrook is one of the best things you can do in London. It's the London Mithraeum, the old Roman temple of Mithras, which has been uncovered, and it is a truly incredible experience to go down there into the Mithraeum. Highly recommend that. As I mentioned before, I've made 2 videos about the Walbrook. One where I walk the course as often described, rising out there sort of in Shoreditch around Moorgate and running down through the city down to the Thames. But then also last year I made another video which proposed an alternative second source for the Walbrook up at the Angel, and so I walked from there to where it met the source, the Shoreditch source. Fascinating. Relevant to us though, by 1520 this section of the Walbrook through the city here had already been culverted. It'd become an open sewer, so it was already buried by the time of the Tudor London map of 1520. And we're crossing Cannon Street here, with the London Stone just up there on the left. Again, that is in at least 1, if not 2 or 3 videos. And we're going to go down Dowgate Hill, which takes us to the Thames, to the confluence of the Walbrook and the Thames. In terms of the names of the city livery companies, I think Tallow Chandlers Hall must be one of my favourites. The Tallow Chandlers. You can imagine how important they were. London pre-electrification, or even pre-gas lighting. I wonder what they do now. Do they still do tallow chandling? I feel like someone told me that day of the Knollys Rose ceremony. And you can see the Tallow Chandlers Hall is here in 1520, right where my thumb is. So they've been on this site for, well, at least 500 years. And Skinner's Hall next door, which is still just down there. Next to the Skinners we have the Dyers Hall, but they aren't there on the 1520 map. We have the, who do we have down here in 1520? We have the Innholders Hall and the Joiners Hall. But not the Dyers in 1520, so they must have arrived at some point later. Yeah, the innholders are still here. It's now in College Street, but on the same site it looks. How wonderful. Another vestige for at least 500 years. Would have been longer, obviously, because if it was here in 1520, it would have been built before then. Fascinating. And opposite the Innholders Hall, we have a nice little collection here, don't we, of boundary markers. Who knows what they mean? So just here at the end of Dowgate, you can see there's a little dock there, but that's the gate, the river gate, the accesses to the Thames. And here we go, the steps are still here, one of the ancient rights of way that gave Londoners access to the river. It's significant in the sense that Stow only records 14 of these stairs, ancient stairs or access points to the river. There's a fantastic article in the London Archaeologist about the medieval water gates, as they were called, Dowgate being one. Here, this is Dowgate surviving. And in the map in the London Archaeologist, it lists 48 such gates. So whether the others had disappeared by the time of Stow's survey of London in 1598, or whether he only just mentioned 14 out of a greater number of them. So the Walbrook makes its confluence with the Thames underneath the railway bridge there, which is interesting because on the Tudor London map, the confluence is to the right of the frame here, further along the Thames to the west. Not much more, probably where I'm stood now, so I guess the course of the stream may have been altered when it was culverted in 1463. But the significance of the location of the confluence of the Walbrook and the Thames was that the great Dick Whittington and his talking cat, and again Dick Whittington, when he was Lord Mayor of London, he oversaw the construction of public privies over the outfall of the Walbrook and the Thames, so it would be cleansed by the tidal movement of the River Thames would have taken people's movements away. Sorry, you have to forgive me for that one. And those privies that were built for 64 men and 64 women that were placed over the Walbrook, which by then was already an open sewer. At the time of Whittington built these privies before it was culverted in 1463. But they were still there at the time of Tudor London. In fact, they were there until the Great Fire of London in 1666. So those privies would have been there for over 200 years. I was telling my wife about it, and she went, "What do you mean by a privy? You mean like the Privy Council?" And I went, "Well, no, it's a public toilet," which is interesting, isn't that? Dual use of a privy being a toilet, an outdoor toilet, but also the council, which advises the head of state. I love that kind of dual use of that. I love that dual use of the term privy, and I think that's a really good point to end this episode of my series of videos on Tudor London. The triumph of Tudor London could be the maintenance of Dick Whittington's medieval public toilets. And Dick Whittington and his talking cat there does highlight one of the challenges, if you like, if there are such challenges of making this wonderful series, is where do you draw the line? Where are the divisions between the periods of time? And there were places that I was going to include in the video today that I've decided to leave. For example, the Bridewell Palace being rebuilt by Henry VIII. So it's marked on the map as a significant location. However, the Bridewell Palace is an incredibly important part of Tudor London, of medieval London, of Norman London, and also Baynard's Castle is another site just to the west here that was going to be in the video. I've made the notes for it. It's still there in Tudor London, but really the existence of Baynard's Castle is again the story of Norman London, of the Norman conquest, of the need for a castle in the city of London, not to protect it from outside threats, but the internal threat. It's a big feature. It's a big feature of Elizabethan London. The Queen Elizabeth had to pass various ordinances to control the behaviour of London, particularly the prentices who would be known to rush into the streets, particularly on public holidays, and cause all sorts of bother. They were restricted in what they could wear. Londoners couldn't wear whatever colourful clothes they wanted. They could only wear plain clothes. You had to have a certain rank to wear certain colours and certain textiles as well. So it was also a place of control, of fervent. It's a fascinating period of history, and you can see it bridges the eras of the medieval period that ends, could be seen to end, it's the late medieval period, and it bridges us into the modern world with the beginning of Stuart London and the transformation of not just of London but of England in many ways. So it's a fascinating bridge between time. It's a great moment. I think that's why the Tudors are so endlessly fascinating. I sound like I'm signing off the series. I may do another one outside the city, to the west, with the palaces, Henry VIII's great Whitehall Palace. But if I don't, it's been an incredible series on Tudor London. And, well, which era do you think is going to be next? I know the one I want to do next. Whether it is the one I'll do next, I'm not entirely sure. Which one would you like to see next? Which era? Bronze Age, Iron Age, Roman London we've done quite a lot of. We're going to have Saxon London, Norman London, Stuart London, Dickens London. I mean, there's going to be others, right? Pepys's London. Anyway, I'm going to head off along there and find a pub. The Red Lion in Leytonstone has recently been renovated and reopened. I might try that for the first time. But anyway, as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing the next walk, wherever that may be. This would have been a better shot, wouldn't it? Why didn't I do this? Never mind.
It's over the meadow, over the stream. It's where I am going and where I have been. It's been a long day now. It's time for a beer. And now for home, of course I must steer. It's over the meadow, over the stream. I hope you are pleased with what you have seen.